The moment I saw Patricia Brennan's silver Lexus pull into my driveway at 7 in the morning, I knew my peaceful Tuesday was about to go straight to hell. I was standing inside my greenhouse, checking the hydroponic tomatoes I'd been growing for the local farmer's market, when I heard her car door slam with that particular force that only comes from someone looking for a fight. The greenhouse was my pride and joy, a beautiful 12 by 24-foot structure I'd built myself 3 years ago when I moved into Meadowbrook Estates in Henderson, Nevada. It had polycarbonate panels that caught the morning sun perfectly, and I'd positioned it in the back corner of my 2-acre property where it didn't bother anyone, or so I thought. I walked out of the greenhouse, wiping my hands on my jeans, and there she was. Patricia Brennan, president of the Meadowbrook Estates HOA, standing in my backyard with a clipboard clutched to her chest like it was a shield. She was wearing one of her trademark pastel pantsuits, this one a particularly aggressive shade of coral, and her blonde highlighted hair was shellacked into place despite the desert wind. "Franklin Quincy," she said, my full name dripping from her mouth like an accusation. "We need to talk about that." She pointed at my greenhouse with one manicured nail. "Good morning to you too, Patricia," I said, keeping my voice level. I'd dealt with her before over minor things. A mailbox that was allegedly 3 inches too far left, the time I put up Christmas lights 2 days before the HOA-approved decoration date. But something about her stance told me this was different. "Don't good morning me. That structure is in direct violation of the Meadowbrook Estates Architectural Guidelines, Section 7, subsection D, which clearly states that all outbuildings must be approved by the Architectural Review Committee before construction." I took a deep breath. "Patricia, I built this greenhouse 3 years ago. You've seen it dozens of times. If it was such a problem, why are we talking about it now?" She lifted her chin, and I saw a gleam in her eyes that made my stomach sink. "Because I'm conducting a comprehensive review of all properties in the estate. Several residents have been taking liberties with our rules, and it ends now. You have 30 days to remove it." "Remove it? Patricia, this greenhouse is part of my livelihood. I sell produce at the farmer's market. It's not some eyesore, it's a functional agricultural structure. I don't care if you're growing the cure for cancer in there, Franklin. Rules are rules. You should have gotten approval. Since you didn't, it has to go." She made a check mark on her clipboard with a flourish that felt intentionally theatrical. I could feel my blood pressure rising. "This is insane. My property backs up to the desert. The only person who can even see it from their house is old Mr. Chen, and he told me last month how much he likes watching it glow at sunset. Mr. Chen doesn't make the rules. I do. Well, the board does, but as president, I enforce them." She handed me a formal letter from her clipboard. "30 days, Franklin, or we'll fine you $500 per day until it's removed. It's all in the letter." She turned on her heel and marched back toward her car, leaving me standing there with the letter in my hand, feeling like I'd just been hit by a truck. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, reading through the entire HOA covenant for what felt like the 100th time since moving in. Patricia was technically right about the approval requirement, though it was buried in so much legal jargon that I'd honestly missed it during construction. But what really got me was the timing. 3 years. 3 years of this greenhouse sitting on my property, visible from the street if you really craned your neck. And suddenly, it was an emergency that required immediate removal. My phone rang. It was my buddy Marcus, who lived 2 streets over in the same development. "Dude, I heard Patricia went after you today," he said. "She hit up 3 other people this week. Jerry with his tool shed, the Robinsons with their deck extension, and now you." "What's her angle?" I asked. "Who knows?" "Power trip," Someone probably told her no about something, and now she's on a rampage. You know how she gets. I did know. Patricia Brennan had moved into Meadowbrook Estates 5 years ago and immediately positioned herself as the defender of property values. She'd run for HOA president on a platform of maintaining excellence and won by a landslide, mainly because nobody else wanted the job. Since then, she'd made it her personal mission to ensure everyone's lives were just a little bit more difficult. "What are Jerry and the Robinsons doing?" I asked. Complying from what I heard, Jerry's tearing down his shed this weekend. The Robinsons are trying to fight it, but Patricia's got the covenant on her side. After I hung up, I poured myself a bourbon and walked out onto my back porch. The greenhouse glowed softly in the darkness, its internal lights on timers to maximize the growing season. Beyond it, the Nevada desert stretched out toward the mountains, dark and endless. That's when I remembered something that made me smile for the first time all day: the water system. When I'd bought this property 3 years ago, one of the selling points had been the private well. Meadowbrook Estates was built in a weird spot, too far from Henderson's main water infrastructure to connect easily to city water. The developer had gotten creative, arranging for several large properties on the edge of the development to maintain private wells, with agreements to supply water to the rest of the neighborhood through a small private utility. My property had the biggest well, and the main pumping station was housed in a concrete building about 50 yards from my greenhouse. I'd signed a 30-year easement agreement with the HOA that gave me a nice monthly check in exchange for maintaining the equipment and keeping the water flowing. The HOA had their own access to the pump house, but I owned the land it sat on, and more importantly, I owned the well itself. I'd almost forgotten about it because the system ran so smoothly. An engineer came out twice a year to do maintenance. The HOA paid me on time every month, and everyone had water. It was the most boring, reliable part of my property ownership, until now. I went back inside and dug through my filing cabinet until I found the original easement agreement. I read it carefully, paying attention to sections I'd skimmed when I signed it. The agreement was crystal clear. I owned the well and the water rights. The HOA had permission to access the pump house and draw water for the community, but that permission was contingent on maintaining good faith and cooperative relations with the property owner. There was also a termination clause. Either party could terminate the agreement with 90 days written notice. I sat back in my chair, thinking. I wasn't a vindictive person by nature. I'd spent 20 years as a civil engineer before semi-retiring and moving to Nevada to grow vegetables and enjoy the desert climate. I believed in being a good neighbor, following reasonable rules, and not causing unnecessary drama. But Patricia had just declared war over a greenhouse that harmed exactly nobody, threatening to fine me $500 a day for the crime of growing tomatoes without asking permission first. I decided to sleep on it. The next morning, I drove into Henderson proper and met with a lawyer named Sarah Chen. No relation to my neighbor Mr. Chen. Apparently it's a common name. I'd found her through a quick internet search and a few good reviews about property law. She was younger than I expected, maybe 35, with sharp eyes and an office that smelled like coffee and paper. I laid out the whole situation: the greenhouse, Patricia's demand, the timeline, and most importantly, the water agreement. "Let me see that easement," she said, and I handed it over. She read it slowly, making little humming noises that I couldn't interpret. Finally, she looked up. "This is interesting," she said. "The good faith clause is stronger than I usually see in these agreements. And you're absolutely right about the termination provision. You can end this with 90 days notice for any reason." "But should I?" I asked. I mean, I don't want to be the guy who turns off a whole neighborhood's water supply over a greenhouse dispute. Sarah leaned back in her chair. Let me be clear. I'm not advising you to turn off anyone's water. That would be illegal and potentially dangerous. But you can terminate the easement agreement, which would require the HOA to find alternative arrangements. They'd still have access to the pump house during the 90-day transition period, and they'd be responsible for securing another water source. How hard would that be for them, in this part of Nevada? Expensive and complicated. They'd probably have to drill a new well or run a line from the city, which would require permits, construction, and significant money. I'd estimate 6 months of work and upwards of $200,000 minimum. I whistled low. That's serious money. It is. Which brings me to my actual advice. Use this as leverage, not a weapon. Send a letter to the HOA board, not just Patricia, explaining that you're being threatened with fines over a 3-year-old greenhouse. Mention that you're concerned about whether this constitutes a breakdown in good faith cooperative relations, as outlined in the water easement. You're not threatening anything directly, just pointing out that you expect to be treated fairly. You think that'll work? I think it'll make them think very carefully before they push you too hard. Patricia Brennan might be the president, but she answers to a board. If the other board members realize she's risking the community's water supply over a greenhouse, they might encourage her to find a compromise. I liked Sarah Chen. She was smart, practical, and didn't seem interested in escalating things unnecessarily. I paid her for 2 hours of consultation and left with a carefully worded letter that she'd helped me draft. That evening, I printed 5 copies of the letter. One went by certified mail to Patricia Brennan at her home address. The other 4 went to the other members of the HOA board: David, Margaret, Robert, and Susan. I didn't know any of them well, but I'd seen them at the annual HOA meetings, nodding along while Patricia ran the show. The letter was polite but firm. It outlined my history as a good neighbor, noted that the greenhouse had existed for 3 years without complaint, and expressed my disappointment at being threatened with punitive fines. Then, in a single paragraph near the end, it mentioned the water easement and my concern about whether the HOA's current approach constituted the good faith relationship required by our agreement. It didn't threaten termination, but the implication was clear enough. I sent the letters on a Wednesday. By Friday afternoon, my phone was ringing off the hook. The first call was from David, the HOA vice president. He was a retired accountant, soft-spoken and careful. "Franklin, I got your letter. I want you to know that I wasn't aware of the greenhouse issue until Patricia brought it to the board last week. She made it sound like you just built it without permission." "I built it 3 years ago, David. It's been there longer than you've been on the board." "That's what I'm learning." "Listen, can we talk about this water situation? I pulled the easement agreement from our files and I see what you're referring to." "I'm not trying to cause problems," I said. "I just want to be treated fairly. This feels like selective enforcement." "I understand. Give me a few days to talk to the other board members. Please don't do anything with the water agreement yet." "I wasn't planning to do anything except protect my own interests, David." The second call was from Margaret, the board secretary. She was more direct. "Franklin, what the hell are you thinking? You're threatening to cut off water to 200 homes." "I'm not threatening anything, Margaret. I'm pointing out that I expect good faith cooperation, which is what I promised to provide and what I expect to receive. Over a greenhouse. Over being threatened with ruinous fines for a structure that's been on my property for 3 years without causing any problems. Yes, Margaret, over that." She hung up on me. The third call came Saturday morning, and it was from Patricia herself. Her voice was tight with barely controlled rage. "How dare you threaten this community?" "Good morning, Patricia. I haven't threatened anyone. You sent a letter implying you'd terminate our water access." "I sent a letter expressing concern about our working relationship. You're the one who started making threats, remember?" $500 a day, wasn't it? That greenhouse is a violation. That existed for 3 years while you drove past it hundreds of times without caring. Why now, Patricia? What changed? There was a pause. "I don't have to explain my enforcement decisions to you." "Actually, you kind of do. Selective enforcement is a real problem in HOA law. If you're going after me for something you've ignored for years while letting other violations slide, that's legally questionable." "Are you threatening to sue now too?" "I'm asking for fairness. Drop the greenhouse issue, or let me go through a proper approval process with reasonable people. Stop threatening me with fines. That's all I want." "The greenhouse comes down, Franklin. You have 25 days left." She hung up. Sunday afternoon, I got a text from Marcus. "Emergency HOA board meeting Monday night. This about you," I texted back. "Probably." Monday evening, I decided to attend the meeting. HOA meetings were technically open to all residents, though usually only 5 or 6 people showed up to listen to boring discussions about landscaping contracts and pool maintenance schedules. Tonight, the community center was packed. Word had gotten around. I walked in and took a seat near the back. Patricia was at the front table with the 4 other board members, looking like she'd bitten into a lemon. When she saw me, her expression hardened. "Let's call this meeting to order," she said, banging a gavel that seemed unnecessarily large. "We have several agenda items tonight, but I think we need to address the elephant in the room first." "That's not how agendas work, Patricia," David said quietly. "We approved an order last week. This is an emergency addition to the agenda, which I'm allowed to make as president." Robert, a large man who owned a construction company, cleared his throat. "If we're talking about what I think we're talking about, maybe we should discuss it in executive session." "No," Patricia said firmly. "This affects the whole community. Everyone should hear this." She turned to address the crowd. "As many of you may have heard, Franklin Quincy has threatened to terminate our water access because I asked him to remove an unauthorized structure from his property." A murmur went through the crowd. I stood up. "That's not accurate, and you know it, Patricia." "Sit down, Franklin. You'll have a chance to speak during the comment period. This is my reputation you're attacking. I'd like to correct the record now." David intervened. "Let him speak, Patricia. This is serious enough that we should hear both sides." Patricia's jaw clenched, but she nodded sharply. I walked to the front, very aware of 40 pairs of eyes watching me. "I built a greenhouse 3 years ago. I've been growing vegetables in it and selling them at the farmer's market. It's been in the same spot for 3 years. Last Tuesday, Patricia came to my house and demanded I tear it down within 30 days or face $500 per day fines. When I asked why this was suddenly an issue after 3 years, she said she didn't care about my circumstances and that rules are rules. I paused, letting that sink in. I sent a letter to the board expressing my concern about this situation. In that letter, I mentioned that I own the well that supplies this community's water, and that the easement agreement requires good faith cooperation between the parties. I pointed out that threatening me with excessive fines over a 3-year-old greenhouse doesn't feel like good faith cooperation. I didn't threaten to turn off anyone's water. I expressed a legitimate concern about our working relationship. "You implied you'd terminate the easement," Patricia snapped. "I implied that I expect to be treated fairly, just like the agreement requires." A woman in the 3rd row raised her hand. I recognized her as Jennifer, who lived near Marcus. I have a question for the board. Why is a 3-year-old greenhouse suddenly a problem? We've all seen it. It's not an eyesore. Patricia answered before anyone else could. It's not about whether it's an eyesore, it's about following rules. If we let one person break the rules, everyone will want to break the rules. But he didn't know he was breaking a rule 3 years ago, another resident called out. And you never said anything until now. That seems unfair. Ignorance of the rules isn't an excuse, Patricia said. David spoke up, his voice carefully neutral. Actually, there's a legal concept called estoppel that might apply here. If we've known about a violation for years and haven't enforced it, we may have waived our right to enforce it later. I looked into this after getting Franklin's letter. Patricia's face went red. Whose side are you on, David? I'm on the side of not getting the HOA sued and not losing our water supply over something that could be resolved reasonably. Franklin, what would it take for you to be satisfied? I thought about it. Let me go through a proper approval process for the greenhouse. A real process, where the Architectural Review Committee actually looks at it, considers its location and purpose, and makes a fair decision. If they decide it genuinely needs to come down for legitimate reasons, I'll work with them on that. But no more threats, no fines while it's under review, and the review needs to be done by people who can be objective. Patricia shouldn't be on the review committee, Marcus said from somewhere in the middle of the room. She's already decided what she wants. It wouldn't be fair. Several people murmured agreement. Patricia stood up, her chair scraping loudly. This is outrageous. I am the president of this HOA, and I will not be dictated to by someone who's trying to blackmail us with our own water supply. Nobody's blackmailing anyone, Margaret said, and I was surprised to hear her taking a moderate tone after her angry call. Let's just calm down and find a solution. Franklin, if we agree to a fair review process, will you withdraw your concerns about the easement agreement? If I'm treated fairly and the process is legitimate, I have no concerns about continuing our water arrangement exactly as it's been for 3 years. I've never had a problem with it, and I don't want to create problems now. Robert spoke for the first time. I move that we establish an ad hoc architectural review committee to evaluate Franklin's greenhouse, with members who haven't been directly involved in this dispute. The committee will have 30 days to conduct its review, and during that time, no fines will be assessed. If the committee approves the structure, this matter is closed. If they don't, we'll work with Franklin on a reasonable timeline for modifications or removal. I second, Susan said immediately. She was an older woman who mostly stayed quiet during meetings, but she looked tired of the drama. All in favor? David asked. 4 hands went up. David, Margaret, Robert, and Susan. Patricia didn't raise her hand. This is a mistake. You're setting a precedent that people can just threaten us to get what they want. We're setting a precedent that we handle things fairly and try to work with residents instead of bullying them, David said quietly. Motion passes 4-1. Franklin, we'll establish the committee this week and let you know who's on it. I nodded. Thank you. As I walked out of the community center, several residents stopped me to shake my hand or pat my back. A few thanked me for standing up to Patricia. One older man said his son had wanted to build a workshop, but was afraid to ask permission because of Patricia's reputation. Marcus caught up with me in the parking lot. Dude, that was intense. You really had her backed into a corner. I didn't want it to go this way, I said honestly. I just wanted to grow tomatoes. Yeah, but Patricia has been out of control for a while now. Maybe this will make the board realize they need to rein her in. Over the next 2 weeks, the Architectural Review Committee did their work. It consisted of 3 people: an architect named Tom who lived in the development, a landscape designer named Rachel, and a retired building inspector named Harold. None of them were on the HOA board, and none of them had been involved in the dispute. They came out to my property on a Saturday morning. I showed them the greenhouse, explained how it worked, demonstrated the hydroponic systems, and answered their questions. They took measurements, photos, and notes. Tom was particularly interested in how I'd anchored it to withstand desert winds. Rachel asked about water usage and drainage. Harold wanted to see the building plans, which I'd kept from the original construction. "Did you pull a permit for this with the county?" Harold asked. I did. It's technically an agricultural structure which has different requirements than a residential outbuilding. The county approved it without issue. That's good. Shows you tried to do things right. He made a note on his clipboard. The following Saturday, I received their written report. It was thorough and fair. They noted that the greenhouse was well constructed, posed no safety hazards, didn't negatively impact neighboring properties, complied with county regulations, and served a legitimate agricultural purpose. They acknowledged that I should have sought HOA approval before construction, but noted the 3-year passage of time and lack of prior complaint. Their recommendation was to grant retroactive approval with the condition that any future modifications would require prior review. The report went to the HOA board on Monday. On Tuesday, David called me. The board voted to accept the committee's recommendation. Patricia voted against it, but she was outvoted 4-1 again. "Your greenhouse is approved. The matter is closed." I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. "Thank you, David. I appreciate you handling this reasonably. Thank you for not actually shutting off our water," he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. That would have been a mess. I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. 2 weeks later, I noticed my monthly water payment from the HOA hadn't arrived. It was usually deposited electronically on the 1st of the month. By the 5th, I still hadn't received it. I sent a polite email to the HOA treasurer asking about the delay. The response came from Patricia. "Payment is under review pending audit of water usage and system maintenance costs." That was odd. The payment amount had been fixed in the easement agreement, with annual adjustments for inflation. There was no provision for audits or usage reviews. The HOA paid me a flat fee, and they could draw as much water as the system could provide. I called David. "What's this about an audit?" he sighed. "Patricia's being Patricia. She's claiming we need to verify that we're not overpaying you." I told her the payment amount is in the contract, but she's insisting. "The contract doesn't allow for audits of the payment amount," I said. "It's a fixed fee, adjusted annually for inflation. This month's payment is 3 weeks late." "I know. I'm trying to sort it out, Franklin. Just give me a few days." A few days turned into a week, then 2 weeks. I sent a formal letter to the HOA board noting that payment was now 30 days overdue, and that failure to pay constituted a breach of the easement agreement. I sent copies to all 5 board members, including Patricia. She responded with a 6-page letter claiming that I had been overpaid for years, that the water system required less maintenance than the fee reflected, and that the HOA was entitled to renegotiate the terms. She demanded detailed financial records of all my maintenance expenses and threatened to sue me for unjust enrichment if I didn't provide them. It was nonsense, legally speaking, but it was also clear what she was doing. Patricia was retaliating for the greenhouse situation by withholding payment and trying to force me into a new agreement on worse terms. I went back to see Sarah Chen. She read Patricia's letter, shaking her head. "This is retaliation, plain and simple. And it's really stupid on her part because the easement agreement is airtight. They have to pay you the specified amount. She can't just decide to withhold payment because she's angry." So what do I do? You send one more letter. Tell them they're in breach of contract, and they have 15 days to cure the breach by paying all overdue amounts plus the late fees specified in the agreement. If they don't, you'll terminate the easement and pursue legal action for the unpaid amounts. Will I actually have to turn off the water? No, but you'll terminate the agreement, which means they'll have to scramble to secure water from another source. During the 90-day termination period, you're still obligated to provide water, and they're still obligated to pay you, including all the back payments. If they don't pay, you can sue them, and you'll win easily. Plus, you can charge them for attorney's fees because the contract includes a prevailing party clause. I sent the letter. This time, I also sent a copy to every single household in Meadowbrook Estates. If Patricia was going to make this a community issue, I wanted everyone to know exactly what was happening. The response was immediate and loud. Residents started showing up at board members' houses, demanding to know why the HOA was risking the water supply. The community Facebook page exploded with arguments. Some people thought I was a bully for threatening the water. Most people thought Patricia was out of control and needed to be stopped before she got the entire community sued. An emergency board meeting was called for the following Monday. This time, even more people showed up than before. The community center was standing room only. Patricia tried to take control of the meeting, but David cut her off. "I'm invoking my authority as vice president to run this meeting," he said. "Patricia, you have a clear conflict of interest here." "I do not. You're personally involved in a dispute with the property owner who supplies our water. That's a textbook conflict. Sit down and let the rest of us handle this." For a moment, I thought Patricia might actually storm out. Her face was purple and her hands were shaking. But she sat down, arms crossed tightly across her chest. David addressed the crowd. "Here's the situation. Our easement agreement with Franklin Quincy requires us to pay a specific monthly fee. That fee has been the same, adjusted for inflation, for 3 years. Last month, we didn't pay it. This month, we still haven't paid it. We're now approximately $6,000 in arrears, plus late fees." A man in the front row raised his hand. "Why didn't we pay?" "Because President Brennan blocked the payment, claiming we needed to audit the arrangement first. However, the contract doesn't provide for such audits. We're simply required to pay the agreed amount." "So pay it," someone called out. "What's the problem?" Margaret spoke up. "The problem is that Patricia has been saying we're overpaying and that Franklin is taking advantage of us. She convinced me and Robert initially that we should review the arrangement. But I've since looked at the contract more carefully, and I've also gotten informal advice from a lawyer. We're in breach. We need to pay him, or he can terminate the easement and we'll be scrambling to find water." "How much would it cost to find a new water source?" someone asked. Robert answered this one. "I've been making calls. Absolute minimum is $200,000 to drill a new well, assuming we hit water at a reasonable depth. Could be more. More likely is $400,000 to $500,000 to run a line from city water, which would also come with ongoing city water bills that would cost every household more than what we're currently paying Franklin." The room erupted in angry voices. David banged the gavel. "Everyone calm down. Here's what we're going to do. I'm making a motion that we immediately pay Franklin Quincy all overdue amounts, including late fees as specified in the contract, and that we continue making regular monthly payments as required. Further, I move that we issue a formal apology for the payment disruption and that we recommit to the terms of the easement agreement." "Second," Susan said quickly. "Discussion." David looked at Patricia. She stood up, trembling with rage. "You're all cowards." This man has bullied us from day one, threatened our water supply, and you're just going to roll over and give him whatever he wants." "He hasn't bullied anyone," David said. "He built a greenhouse. You tried to make him tear it down. He asked to be treated fairly. You retaliated by withholding his contractual payments. Every step of this disaster has been your doing, Patricia. I was enforcing our rules, selectively, vindictively, and now illegally by breaching a contract. I've had enough. All in favor of my motion." 4 hands went up instantly. Motion passes. "Patricia, I'm also making a second motion that we open a discussion at next month's regular meeting about a vote of no confidence in your leadership as president. This has gone too far." Patricia grabbed her purse and stormed out of the community center. The door slammed behind her so hard that the windows rattled. The next day, I received an electronic payment for the full overdue amount plus late fees. A formal letter of apology, signed by David, Margaret, Robert, and Susan, arrived by email that afternoon. Patricia's name was notably absent. I thought that would finally be the end of it. It wasn't. 3 days later, I woke up to the sound of grinding metal. I pulled on clothes and ran outside to find a commercial truck parked near the pump house. 2 men in work uniforms were attempting to break the lock on the pump house door with bolt cutters. "Hey!" I shouted, running toward them. "What the hell are you doing?" One of them looked up. "We're with Desert Water Systems. We got a work order to perform an emergency inspection and maintenance on this pump." "From who?" He checked his clipboard. "Patricia Brennan. She's listed as the HOA president. Let me see that work order." He handed it over. It was on HOA letterhead, signed by Patricia, claiming there were urgent concerns about water quality and system safety that required immediate inspection and possible equipment replacement. "This is my property," I said. "That building is on my land. You can't just break in." "Look, man, we're just doing our job. We got a work order from someone who doesn't have authority to issue it. The easement agreement gives the HOA access to the pump house for legitimate maintenance, but they're supposed to coordinate with me. And more importantly, emergency inspection isn't a real thing here. The system was inspected 6 weeks ago by our regular contractor. Everything is fine." The worker looked at his partner, uncertain. "Maybe we should call the office." "Good idea." While they made their call, I took photos of everything: the truck, the workers, the work order, and the attempted damage to the lock. Then I called the police non-emergency line and explained that someone had sent contractors to break into a building on my property without permission. A deputy showed up 20 minutes later. By then, the workers had already left, their office having apparently told them to abandon the job. The deputy took my statement and looked at the photos. "You want to press charges?" he asked, "against the workers?" "No, they were just following what they thought was a legitimate work order, but I want a record of this incident." "Sounds like an HOA dispute," the deputy said, making notes. "Those can get nasty. My parents' neighborhood had one where someone poisoned another guy's trees over a fence dispute." "I just want to grow vegetables and be left alone," I said. He smiled sympathetically. "Good luck with that." I called Sarah Chen again. This was becoming expensive, but I was way past the point of trying to handle it myself. "She did what?" Sarah sounded genuinely shocked when I explained. "Sent contractors to break into my pump house under false pretenses." "That's not just a contract dispute anymore, Franklin. That's potentially trespassing, attempted vandalism, maybe even criminal mischief. And it's definitely harassment." "What are my options?" "Restraining order for one. We can also send a cease and desist letter threatening legal action if she continues. And honestly, you might want to consider actually terminating that easement. Not out of spite, but because Patricia Brennan has demonstrated that she can't be trusted to maintain a good faith business relationship. The board seems reasonable, but she's the president, and she clearly has access to HOA resources that she's willing to abuse. If I terminate the easement, 200 families lose their water. Not immediately. They'd have 90 days, and the board could probably work something out with you or find an alternative source. But that's not your responsibility, Franklin. You've been more than reasonable. She's now crossed the line into potentially criminal behavior. I thought about it. Let me talk to David first. Maybe the board can actually remove her. That evening, I met David at a coffee shop in Henderson. He looked exhausted. I heard about the pump house thing, he said before I could even speak. Jennifer saw the truck and called me. Franklin, I'm so sorry. This is completely out of hand. David, I can't keep dealing with this. I'm spending thousands in legal fees, I'm stressed out of my mind, and now Patricia is apparently willing to commit crimes to retaliate against me. Something has to change. The board is meeting tomorrow night. We're going to vote to remove her as president. We have the authority to do that with a majority vote. Will that be enough? She'll still be on the board. We can also vote to remove her from the board entirely, but that requires a vote of the full membership at a special meeting. It's a bigger process. How long? 30 days to notify everyone, then the vote. She could do a lot of damage in 30 days. I rubbed my face. I'm going to terminate the easement agreement, David. I'm giving you the full 90 days, and I'll do everything I can to help you find an alternative solution. But I can't have a business relationship with an organization that Patricia Brennan has authority within. It's not safe for me. David nodded slowly. I understand. I hate that it's come to this, but I understand. Can you give us a week? Let us remove her as president first. If we can marginalize her authority, maybe you won't have to terminate. 1 week, I agreed, but I'm drafting the termination letter tonight. If anything else happens, if she tries anything else, I'm sending it immediately. The next night, the HOA board held a closed executive session. I wasn't there, but Marcus texted me updates as he heard them through the community gossip network. They voted to remove Patricia as president, 3-1. Margaret voted no. David is new president now. Patricia freaked out, threatened to sue everyone, left screaming. 2 days later, I got a letter from an attorney representing Patricia Brennan personally. It accused me of extortion, harassment, defamation, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. It demanded $50,000 in damages and a public apology. I forwarded it to Sarah Chen. Her response email was short. "This is garbage, don't respond, I'll handle it." Sarah sent back a letter that apparently tore apart every claim Patricia's lawyer had made. She also included a counter-threat. If Patricia continued to harass me, we would pursue a restraining order and file our own lawsuit for harassment, abuse of process, and intentional interference with contract. For a few days, things were quiet. I started to hope it was actually over. Then my greenhouse burned down. I woke up at 2 in the morning to the smell of smoke. By the time I got outside, the entire structure was engulfed in flames. I called 911, but there was nothing to be done. The polycarbonate panels created toxic smoke, and the fire was so hot that even the metal frame was warping. The fire department focused on keeping it from spreading to my house. By dawn, there was nothing left but twisted metal and ashes. The fire investigator arrived around 8 in the morning. He spent 2 hours examining the scene, taking samples and asking me questions. Finally, he showed me something, a melted plastic container that had held gasoline. "This wasn't an accident," he said. "This was arson. I'm calling in the sheriff's detectives." Detective Lisa Morrison showed up around noon. She was in her 40s with tired eyes and a no-nonsense attitude. I told her everything. The HOA dispute, Patricia's escalating behavior, the pump house incident, all of it. "You think Patricia Brennan did this?" she asked. "I think she's been escalating for weeks, and I think she's unstable enough to do something like this, yes. That's a serious accusation. My greenhouse is a pile of ashes. Someone burned it down deliberately. Patricia has been trying to get rid of that greenhouse for months. You do the math." Detective Morrison made notes. "I'll need to talk to her, but I have to tell you, proving arson is hard. Proving who committed arson is even harder. She's been sending me threatening letters. She tried to break into my pump house. There's a pattern here. I'll investigate." That's all I can promise. Over the next week, I learned that Detective Morrison had interviewed Patricia, who had an alibi. She'd been at a casino in Las Vegas the night of the fire, and she had hotel receipts and video footage to prove it. She also had interviews with multiple people who'd seen her there. But Morrison kept investigating. She pulled phone records, looked at Patricia's finances, and talked to the contractors who'd been sent to my pump house. She also talked to Patricia's neighbors. One of them, an elderly man named George, remembered seeing Patricia talking to a younger man in her driveway a few days before the fire. The man had been driving a beat-up pickup truck. George had noticed because the man looked rough and seemed like an odd person for Patricia to know. Morrison showed George some photos from a database. He identified the man as Tyler Matthews, who had a record for assault and drug possession. More importantly, Tyler had recently been hired to do some landscaping work for several properties in Meadowbrook Estates. Patricia had recommended him to the HOA. Morrison brought Tyler in for questioning. At first, he denied everything. Then Morrison told him they'd found his fingerprints on the gas can, a bluff, because the can was too melted. But Tyler didn't know that, and he cracked. Patricia had paid him $3,000 to burn down my greenhouse. She'd given him cash, shown him where it was, and told him to make it look accidental. Tyler had agreed because he needed money, and because Patricia convinced him that I was a bad guy who was threatening the neighborhood's water supply. Morrison arrested Tyler for arson. Then she went to Patricia's house with a warrant. I wasn't there for the arrest, but Marcus was walking his dog nearby and saw the whole thing. He said Patricia screamed that it was all a misunderstanding, that Tyler had acted on his own, that she barely knew him. But when detectives searched her house, they found a burner phone with text messages between her and Tyler planning the arson. She'd been stupid enough to keep it. Patricia Brennan was arrested and charged with conspiracy to commit arson, criminal mischief, and a few other charges I didn't fully understand. Her bail was set at $50,000. She posted it and was released pending trial. The HOA board sent me a formal letter expressing their horror at what had happened and offering to pay for the replacement of my greenhouse. I accepted, mainly because my insurance company was going to subrogate against the HOA anyway, but I still sent the termination letter for the water easement. David called me immediately. "Franklin, please reconsider. Patricia's gone. She's not even on the board anymore. We voted her off entirely. She can't hurt you anymore." "She hired someone to burn down my greenhouse, David. She could have killed me. My house could have caught fire." "This isn't about HOA politics anymore. This is about my safety. I understand, but please give us a chance to make this right. What would it take?" I thought about it. "A new easement agreement. One that has stronger protections for me, clear consequences if the HOA breaches any terms, and maybe a higher monthly payment to compensate me for all the hell I've been through." "Done. Name your terms. We'll agree to anything reasonable." Over the next month, Sarah Chen negotiated a new agreement with the HOA's attorney. The monthly payment increased by 40%. The agreement included specific provisions prohibiting harassment, requiring all communication to go through proper channels, and giving me the right to terminate immediately if anyone associated with the HOA threatened me or my property. It also required the HOA to maintain $2 million in liability insurance that specifically covered actions by board members and volunteers. In exchange, I agreed to a new 30-year term and to work cooperatively with the HOA on any future issues. We signed the new agreement in late September. By then, I'd already started rebuilding the greenhouse with the insurance money and the HOA's payment. This time, I installed security cameras and a fire suppression system. Patricia's criminal trial was set for January. Her lawyer tried to get a plea deal, but the district attorney wasn't interested. Arson was serious, and hiring someone to commit arson showed premeditation. The DA wanted prison time. I attended the trial when I could. It lasted 4 days. Tyler Matthews testified against Patricia, describing how she'd approached him, what she'd paid him, and what she'd told him to do. The burner phone texts were entered into evidence. Patricia's defense was that Tyler had acted on his own and was framing her, but the evidence was overwhelming. The jury convicted her on all counts. At sentencing, the judge noted that Patricia had abused a position of trust as HOA president and had endangered not just my property but potentially my life and the lives of firefighters. He sentenced her to 5 years in state prison. Patricia's face crumpled when she heard the sentence. Her lawyer put an arm around her shoulders, but she shook him off. As the bailiff led her away, she looked back at me one time. I expected to see hatred, but instead she just looked broken. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. After the trial, life in Meadowbrook Estates slowly returned to normal. David turned out to be a good HOA president, focused on actual community improvement rather than petty rule enforcement. The new architectural review process became reasonable and fair. Several people built workshops, sheds, and other structures without drama. My new greenhouse was even better than the original. I expanded my vegetable production and started supplying to 2 farmers' markets and a local restaurant. The hydroponic tomatoes were especially popular. One Saturday morning, about 6 months after Patricia's sentencing, I was working in the greenhouse when I heard footsteps outside. I tensed instinctively, but when I looked up, it was just Mr. Chen, my elderly neighbor. "Franklin," he said with his gentle smile, "I wanted to thank you." "For what?" "For standing up to her. Patricia tried to make me remove my koi pond 2 years ago, said it was a mosquito hazard. I loved that pond. I gave in because I was afraid, but you didn't give in, and now I'm building a new pond even bigger than before." He handed me a bag of oranges from his tree. "These are for you, and I want to buy your tomatoes. My wife says they're the best she's ever had." After he left, I stood in my greenhouse, holding the bag of oranges, looking out at the desert beyond my property. The morning sun was turning the mountains pink and gold. Water misted gently over the tomato plants. Everything smelled like growth and possibility. I'd moved to Nevada to escape stress and find peace. It hadn't worked out the way I'd planned. But standing there in my rebuilt greenhouse, on my property, with good neighbors and a fair HOA president and a future full of tomatoes, I realized I'd found something better than peace. I'd found home, and I'd learned I was willing to fight for it. The criminal case wasn't quite finished. Patricia's conviction was being appealed, but Sarah said it wouldn't go anywhere. The evidence had been too strong, and the trial had been conducted properly. Patricia would serve at least 3 years before being eligible for parole. Marcus stopped by later that afternoon with beer and news. "Did you hear? Margaret resigned from the board," Said she couldn't handle the stress anymore. Can't blame her. This year has been insane. David asked if you'd consider joining the board. He thinks having you involved would help rebuild trust in the HOA. I almost laughed. Me. After everything that happened, because of everything that happened, people respect that you stood up for yourself but also tried to be reasonable. And you've got experience with infrastructure and engineering. We could use someone like that. I'll think about it, I said, though I was pretty sure my answer would be no. I'd had enough HOA drama to last a lifetime, but a week later I changed my mind. If I was going to live in Meadowbrook Estates, I wanted to make sure it never turned into the kind of place where someone like Patricia could abuse power again. The best way to do that was from inside the system. I joined the board in November, taking Margaret's vacant seat. My first motion was to establish a formal complaint process for residents who felt they were being treated unfairly. It passed unanimously. My second motion was to require training for all board members on HOA law, fair enforcement practices, and conflict resolution. That passed too. Slowly, meeting by meeting, we turned Meadowbrook Estates into the kind of community it should have been all along. A place where people could live their lives, build their greenhouses, dig their koi ponds, and feel secure in their homes without fear of arbitrary enforcement or petty tyrants. The water kept flowing. My tomatoes kept growing. The desert sun kept rising over the mountains each morning, painting everything gold. And in a state prison about 200 miles away, Patricia Brennan learned that actions have consequences, and that threatening people's livelihoods and burning down their property gets you exactly what you deserve. I never visited her in prison. I never wrote her a letter or expressed any satisfaction at her fate. But I did sometimes think about that morning when she'd stood in my backyard in her coral pantsuit, pointing at my greenhouse with such certainty that she had the power to destroy what I'd built. She'd been wrong about a lot of things, but most of all, she'd been wrong about power. Real power isn't the authority to tell people what to do. It's the courage to stand up when someone tries to take something you've rightfully earned. It's the wisdom to choose your battles carefully. And it's the strength to fight fair, even when your opponent won't. I'd learned all of that because of a greenhouse and a woman who couldn't stand the idea that someone might not follow her rules. In a way, I owed her a strange kind of gratitude, not for the harassment or the arson or the stress, but for teaching me that I was stronger than I thought, that my community was better than its worst member, and that sometimes the right fight is worth fighting, even when it seems easier to just give in. The greenhouse stood in my backyard, gleaming in the Nevada sun, full of tomatoes and hope. And every time I walked into it, I smiled, remembering the morning Patricia Brennan had told me it had to go. She'd been so certain, she'd been so wrong. And I was still here, growing vegetables, supplying water, and living my life exactly the way I wanted to live it. That was the best revenge of all. Simply continuing to exist, flourish, and be happy, long after the person who tried to tear me down had destroyed herself instead. The water flowed. The tomatoes grew. Life went on. And somewhere in the distance, beyond the desert and the mountains, justice had been served. Just as surely as I served fresh vegetables every Saturday morning at the farmer's market, grown in a greenhouse that no one would ever make me tear down again.